Our phones are like adult pacifiers. So whenever we're feeling any kind of discomfort, we need the pacifier. So we scroll on our phone. That's all it is. It's an adult pacifier. And much like at some point you got to wean a baby off a pacifier, like we got to wean ourselves off the adult pacifier. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, having our own thoughts, being a little bit bored. Like these are not problems to solve. These are parts of the human experience. How this relates to zombie burnout. Zombie burnout is a kind of burnout where it's not that you're burnt out from doing too much. It's that you're burnt out from not doing enough of things that actually light you up. So it's this numbed out feeling of going through the motions, of kind of hitching a ride on the algorithm if you're spending a lot of time on the internet and going wherever it takes you. And you finish the day and you're both really exhausted, but also really restless at the same time. And the reason for that is you're just drained from doing nothing meaningful. And you can have two people that put in the same number of hours of work in a day or a week or a month. And one of those people can burn out and the other one could be flourishing. And the only difference is the one that's flourishing actually finds what they're doing invigorating and meaningful. And so much of how we spend our days is on this algorithmic conveyor belt to nowhere. Sometimes it's our own doing. It's scrolling. It's getting like watching all these short form videos nonstop. It's getting hooked up in the gossip and rage machine. Other times it's in a work setting where we're just responding to like short emails and texting all day. And like we're never really doing any deep focus work, which we know is so gratifying and fulfilling. So that's zombie burnout. How does it connect to our phones? How do we get out of it? I think it's really simple. I think you have to identify periods of time where you want to engage in something in an intimate way, where you want to give something your all. And then you have to leave all the devices that can possibly get in the way and distract you. You have to leave them behind or remove them. So again, simple, not easy. What does this look like? It looks like putting your phone in the basement, putting it in your attic for 2 hours, and then sitting down to write. If you are a coach, it looks like, hey, when we enter the clubhouse or when we enter the training facility, here's a little lockbox that everybody drops their phones in because we care deeply about pursuing excellence in this sport. And we all know, like even the most addicted to their phones people, they know that their phone is distracting them and making them kind of feel like a zombie. So you just say, like, you don't want to feel like a zombie. Yeah, it's going to be hard to take the pacifier out, but we've got to take it out. And I think like it's another one of these practices that is so straightforward, but that doesn't make it easy, which is identify the times and places where you want to give your all to something, figure out the things that are distractions, and remove the distractions.
And how do you manage that in your own life, especially as you are trying to market a book?
Yeah.
And then also, I know you're coaching your kids' soccer teams. You have kids, and maybe this is just like a mom excuse, but there are times when like Kelly leaves his phone behind, and I think to myself, like, must be nice because I have my phone in case the kids need something. Um, and so, how do you manage that in this sort of universe where it's like there's this expectation that you're reachable at all times, even by your own kids, and you're coaching teams, and there's communication around that. Like, how do you manage this? At this time, especially when you're marketing a book and you have to probably be online way more than normal.
Yeah, I think that you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. So I think the coaching example is great. There's all kinds of research that shows that just having a phone in your pocket, even if it's not turned on, so your phone is off, detracts from whatever you're doing because we've just gotten so habituated to the feeling of having a phone in our pocket that it reminds us of all the things that could be happening in the world. This is why you get phantom vibrations. Like your nervous system is on such alert for that thing to ring. So on the one hand, I'd love to leave my phone completely behind. On the other hand, I live in the modern world, and my 8U basketball team has a text thread with all the parents saying, Lincoln's out. He's got the flu. Ronan's got the stomach bug. Wyatt's going to be 5 minutes late. I forgot. What time does the game start at? So I need my phone to be able to respond to them. However, once I'm in the gym and I count and I know we have at least 5 players who are there, so we've got enough to field a team, I give my phone to my wife who's in the stands. I don't want it in my pocket during that game because in that 90 minutes, I want to lock in and be fully there. And there's a reason that 90 minutes is so fulfilling. It's not just because I love coaching young kids. It's because I also don't have my phone in my pocket. When it's time for family dinners, same thing. The phone, it goes in a completely different area of the house. It's not charging on the island in the kitchen where I can see it out of the corner of my eye. It's completely gone. Something else that I did for a long time is I had a flip phone. And the flip phone is what you could carry, Juliet, or Kelly could carry, that your daughters have your flip phone number. So you have the peace of mind knowing that if there's an emergency or if they need to contact you, they can call you on your flip phone, but you're not going to have access to the internet. You're not going to be able to text because the older the flip phones are, the more you have to like hit number three, 6 times to
Yeah,
get to
no
the
one's
letter
got time
D.
for that.
No one's got time for that. You're not going to text. But you still have that layer of comfort. Um,
That's
Something
T9,
else.
everybody.
Yeah, right. Something that's it. T9. Something else that I do that I think is really important is not to have the phone in the bedroom. So sleep is really important, and I don't want to have this like perpetual distraction, news arousing device on my nightstand. So the phone gets charged downstairs on a different floor in a completely different room. So it's just, again, it's figuring out those moments where you want to lock in and be present and then not having the phone with you. Before big workouts, I don't even bring the phone into the gym. I just put it in my glove box. Um, a lot of people, I don't know exactly how you all train or how you track your training, but like part of the technology is great. My phone has an app on it called True Coach. And in True Coach, I get all my workouts. There's examples. I can log my sets and reps. So for some workouts, I'm just doing that in real time. But for key workouts or just on a day when I feel like I've got zombie burnout because I've been on the internet all day, that shit stays in the glove box of my car and I bring in a notebook and I log everything in my little notebook. And then I take 4 minutes. It's all it takes, 4 minutes after the workout to log it in my phone so that my coach can see what I did.
I love it. Okay, turning directions again. I see that you are very influenced by the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which Kelly and I also both read as undergrads and loved, but I don't think either one of us have reread it. I noticed on Instagram you just recently reread it. And I think that it was influential in writing this book. So tell us a little bit about why do you love that book, and how does it relate to the pursuit of excellence?
I love that book so much. So it's a very dense book. It's not for everyone is the first thing I'll say, but it was definitely for me. So Robert Pirsig, the book's author, at the center of that book is this term quality. And he describes quality as an event that occurs when a subject or an actor cares so deeply about their act or their object that it becomes hard to separate the two. So this is the craftsperson that cares just so deeply about his or her craft that you can no longer separate the carpenter from the table or the woodworker from the bench. It's just all one act. This is the basketball player that is no longer playing basketball. Basketball is just happening. Like you are so intimate with what you're doing. You are so in the pocket. You are in such a groove that you get this quality. And what Pirsig said is that the more that something has quality, the better it makes us feel and the more it contributes to the world. Pirsig, in his later writing, started to link quality to excellence. And unfortunately, he passed away while he was working on a book called On Quality, which was only published after he died. And On Quality has so many of these obscure journal entries that he hadn't ever published before when he was alive. And you can see in his train of thought, he's linking quality to excellence. And I came across this book On Quality. It was actually published when I was midway working through this book. And that's what made me realize that, like, what I call intimacy, he calls quality. And we're all pointing at the same thing. Like, a good life is one that has quality, that has intimacy, not just with other people, but with the things that you care about. So that book has been enormously influential on me. Um, I've read it probably 10 times now. And each time I read it, I get something new about it. It also raises to real like I'm not saying this right. Let me say this again. It also raises some real questions about trade-offs. So I have a young child now, and in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the narrator and the author is on a motorcycle trip with his kid, and he's a terrible father. He's just like an asshole. He's not present for his kid at all. And the reason for that is he's so obsessed with this idea of quality and with trying to figure out what it means and how to communicate it that he's not having a quality experience with his own kid. And I think that is a really important lesson. And that teaches us a lot too, that when we get really wrapped up in something, there can be enormous costs. And if we're not careful of those costs, we might not even be practicing what we're preaching. So by no means is Robert Pirsig like up on a pedestal as a perfect person, but I think he had a great idea. And that idea has really shaped my philosophy of life. And in many ways is the inspiration behind this book.